The year was 1909. Las Vegas was not yet neon, not yet casinos, not yet the desert's jewel of false promises. It was dust, it was heat, it was whispers of a railroad town that might one day matter, and it began, according to records that were never meant to be read, with the Henderson family, a family of ranchers who became land barons overnight. They bought a tract of desert land so cursed, so drenched in a silence that locals swore shifted with the wind, that no one else would touch it. But there was a condition, not in writing, not in law, but in ritual. The Hendersons were told, by whom no one remembers, that to make the land yield water, fortune, and permanence, they had to give it something first. Not money, not blood and metaphor, blood and truth. 89 bodies. Old county records list a string of disappearances in 1909. Children from migrant camps, 2 sisters from a Methodist orphanage, a boy who was last seen walking barefoot on the rails, singing to himself. Their names are faintly scratched in forgotten ledgers, but their families' grief never reached newspapers because the Hendersons were rising in status. They knew the sheriff, they knew the priests. And when questions were asked, they were buried in silence, just like the children were buried in sand. Jacob Henderson, the father, was described in photographs as a man with hollow eyes, like he had seen something he could never put down again. His face was sharp, always turned slightly away from the lens, as if hiding something etched deep into the bone. His wife, Margaret, never smiled in public, never wrote a single letter that survived. It was said the Hendersons did not sleep in their house for the first year, but outside, under the desert stars, as if afraid of what waited for them indoors. Las Vegas historians often point to the Henderson purchase as a pivotal land deal that expanded settlement into the desert. But they do not mention the terms, the whispered pact, repeated like scripture but never recorded. The Hendersons agreed to return to the earth what the earth had already claimed. What does that mean? Some say it referred to the desert graves of indigenous tribes displaced in earlier decades. Others say it meant the railroad workers who died in silence under company orders. The Hendersons, however, took the meaning literally. Bodies were delivered to the sand. The Catholic orphanage on the edge of Las Vegas recorded a sudden decrease in its number of wards. Pages torn from its ledger, neat ink strokes suddenly interrupted mid-line, as if someone ripped the paper in haste. The church blamed disease, but desert doctors swore there was no outbreak. The truth was simpler and far darker. The orphans were not buried in marked graves. Their absence was an offering. Imagine 89 shallow holes carved into desert soil. Imagine the sound of dirt hitting cloth. Imagine the silence that followed, broken only by the Henderson patriarch's ragged breathing. Neighbors claimed to see torchlight on the Henderson land at night, lanterns moving in long, slow arcs, and they swore they heard hymns, though no words matched scripture. The Southern Pacific Railroad had a vested interest in Henderson land. They wanted stability, water rights, and the appearance of legitimacy. What they didn't want was scandal, so when rumors spread of missing children, the company lawyers intervened. Witnesses disappeared, reports were destroyed, and the Hendersons were not only protected, they were rewarded. Land values rose. By 1910, Las Vegas was swelling. Saloons, brothels, rail yards, but the Henderson Ranch remained untouched by trespassers. Children were warned not to wander near it. Men who did came back changed, eyes unfocused, hands trembling. One described hearing voices underground, like the soil itself had learned to whisper. Margaret, the matriarch, began sewing dolls out of torn bed sheets. She made 89 of them, each with crude faces, each buried in a box beneath her bed. When her daughter asked why, she said, "Because they won't stay down if I don't." A surviving sheriff's ledger records something cryptic. Henderson payment received, 89 accounted for, water rights secured. No one has been able to explain this entry. Was it a bribe, or was it documentation of something deeper? A ritual transaction recorded in the language of bureaucracy. After the final burial, the Henderson land changed. Springs broke through the desert floor. Wells filled, crops grew in soil that should have been barren. Other ranchers failed, the Hendersons thrived. Their wealth became myth, and behind every acre of green stood 89 bodies decomposing beneath it. The Southern Pacific awarded the Hendersons an exclusive contract to supply cattle. That contract built an empire, and yet the Henderson family never smiled in photographs. Their house was always half shuttered, curtains drawn even in daylight. Some said wealth had cursed them, not blessed them. In 1911, a traveling preacher stayed at the Henderson ranch. He later wrote in his journal that he could not sleep for the sound of scratching on the walls. When he searched, he found children's shoes, dozens of them, stuffed into crawl spaces as if hidden. Each shoe carried desert sand. Locals remembered one tree on the Henderson property that never cast a shadow. Animals would not go near it. One summer night, it caught fire without lightning. The flames burned white, not red. And though the tree was reduced to ash, no one could find a scorch mark on the ground. The Hendersons planted nothing there again. In 1922, the Hendersons' only surviving daughter, Catherine, spoke publicly for the first time. In a church in Reno, she whispered to a priest that her family's fortune was built on children. Days later, she was committed to an asylum. The priest who heard her confession left the church, moving east and never returning. Between 1930 and 1940, nearly every document connected to the Hendersons disappeared. County land records were lost in a fire. Photographs were stolen from archives. Even gravestones on the property were shattered. Only oral histories remain, spoken in hushed tones by desert families who still say the Hendersons paid a price that no one else was willing to pay. When the Hoover Dam was being constructed, workers unearthed bones near the Henderson ranch. They were told to say nothing. Supervisors ordered immediate reburial. Some workers claimed the bones were too small, child-sized. By the late 1940s, the Henderson line had almost vanished. Illness struck, madness spread, and heirs either drank themselves to death or disappeared. The wealth remained, the family did not. One photograph survives, taken in 1949. It shows the last Henderson heir standing at the edge of the ranch, staring into the desert. Behind him, if you look closely enough, are faint figures in the sand. 89 shapes, blurred but visible. Today, the Henderson land lies under highways, casinos, and endless neon. No marker remains, no memorial stands, but beneath the city's glow, beneath its millions of tourists, the desert keeps its count. 89 bodies, 89 debts, 89 voices that the Hendersons gave to the earth so that Las Vegas could rise. And when you walk the strip at night, amid the laughter and lights, you might feel it too, the quiet, ancient silence beneath your feet.